Here's an overview I want you to pay attention to. So basically, as you can see on the screen here, you are going to put your name here. So this is, you put your name, not your trade name, and you want to put your EIN. And on the next line, you want to put your trade name. So here we're speaking about your DBA or your regular company name. And then you want to put your address. So street, you want to put your city and your zip and your state, of course. And so on line A here, it says if you don't have to file returns in the future, you want to check here and enter final payments made. And in this case, this is not applicable because our business is still operating. So line A, you only want to put information here if you're filing for bankruptcy or there has been some kind of a business reorganization where you are merging into another company. So this is but otherwise you just go straight to the first line here. So federal income tax withheld from pensions, annuities, IRAs, gambling, winnings, whatever. So we put 2 million. So you have to put your the amount applicable to your specific situation here. And if there is any backup withholding, in our case, this amount was 400,000 during the year, and it's one of those things where you have to actually you have to put the right amount. And again, any amount you put here has to match what you have in your financial records. So total taxes here, and on line 3, in our case it was a $2.4 million. And then you want to put the total deposits for 2023, including overpayments. So on the overpayments applied from a prior period, and we actually made it $2,550,000. Okay, and so the balance due, there's no balance due. So in our case, lucky us. But if you are in a situation where you actually made less deposit than what you owe, then you have to actually you have to pay something extra. But in our case, it was the other way around. So we actually, as you can see on line 6, you have to put the overpayment. So in our case, we had an overpayment of $150,000, and this is because line 4 was more than line 3. So line 4, $2.55 million, and line 3 was $2.4 million. So the delta was in our favor. So we put here, you put the difference. Pretty straightforward in terms of the calculations. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. Next, what you want to put here is you want to explain a little bit. You want to contextualize the situation, okay? And it's one of those things where you have to, as you can see here, you have to put your monthly summary of the federal tax liability. So we put everything from January all the way to December. So January, this is line 7A, all the way through December, this is line 7L. And when you add all those things, the amount is $2.4 million. Now, this $2.4 million actually matches what I showed you a little earlier. If you remember, on line 3 of the earlier screenshot that I showed you, it was 2.4. So this 2.4 is actually you get the amount. Okay, so line 7A all the way to line 7L. So you put the total amount on line 7M, so 2.4. And so if there is a third-party designee, you have to put the person's name here. A third-party designee can be a CPA, a tax preparer, an enrolled agent, let's say a tax attorney, for instance, that you want the IRS to reach out to. So you put the person's PIN number here, if applicable, and you have to sign, you who are filing the form, okay? So you have to put your name, you have to put your title at the company, you have to date it, you have to date the form, and at the bottom, you actually have to put the bid preparer use only. So basically, you put if the CPA you paid to, you really put the information there. It's pretty straightforward. We put the firm's name, the address, and so on and so forth. The first third-party designee could be your CPA, or it could be another person. It doesn't have to be the same person, so to speak. And next, I'm showing you right now here. This is where you actually this is called a payment voucher, but in our case we had an overpayment, so the situation was more in our favor, right? So but if you actually had a deficit, if the delta was not going in your favor, then when you actually file Form 945, you had to attach a voucher, like a voucher telling the IRS how much you owe and how you're paying, okay? So a voucher and a check, of course. This is if you're filing manually, because if you're filing electronically, you had to actually pay through the electronic federal tax paying system. So I will talk about that later on. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about Form 945. Let me give you the approach you need to really pay attention to here. So when we talk about Form 945, what are we talking about? Well, Form 945 reports federal income taxes that have been withheld from non-employees. So employers actually must let the IRS know about backup withholding if they deduct this tax from this individual's pay. And the thing here is that, Form 945 is used to report to the IRS taxes withheld from non-payroll payments made for a variety of reasons. And one source of this withheld taxes is backup withholding. So, but some gambling winnings and military retirement benefits must have taxes withheld, and this will be reported on this form as well. And you might be required to take backup withholding from payments to independent contractors if they fail to give you a correct tax identification or social security number. Okay, now this form is available online and can be e-filed, not a problem. Now, when we talk about Form 945, how does it really work? It's important to understand that Form 945 is an annual return. You don't have to do this on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis. It is an annual return that summarizes all the federal income taxes you withheld on the backup withholding requirements from non-employees, okay? And it's one of those things where the IRS, again, has a clear definition of what kind of backup withholding they want you to make, because the IRS calls any payments you make they're not applicable to a regular payroll. They call it non-payroll payments. And so it's one of those things where you want to, again, make sure that you have a proper documentation. And one thing I need to say though, payments to non-employees must be reported to the payee and the IRS on Form 1099 NEC for non-employee compensation, and Form 1099 MIS is used for other types of payments like prizes, rents, and royalties. So generally speaking, you only have to withhold on payments to independent contractors if the contractor doesn't give you a taxpayer identification number, the TIN they give you is incorrect, or you get a notice from the IRS saying you have to withhold the taxes. In some cases, the IRS will reach out to you directly and let you know, hey, listen, we want you to withhold taxes so that you can be in compliance with your federal tax reporting responsibility. So when we talk about Form 945, it's important to understand that you have a certain category of employers who use this form. And employers use Form 95. Now, the form is not just reserved for payments to independent contractors, okay? And there are also some other types of payments that your business might make. They are subject to backup withholding and would require you to withhold income taxes and report those taxes to the IRS on Form 945. Again, I want to go back to what I said earlier, that the IRS calls any kind of non-payroll transactions, they call it non-payroll income tax withholding. In other words, the tax that you are withholding vis-a-vis those scenarios. So you will use Form 945 if you made payments for pensions, gambling winnings that are not subject to regular gambling withholding, Indian gaming profits, military retirements, voluntary withholding on some government payments. And other payments that may be subject to withholding include rents and commissions, gross payments reported on Form 1099K, and certain Form 1099G payments. And Form 945 basically corresponds with any payments that are made and reported on one of the various 1099 forms, including 1099 MIS, 1099 NEC, or on Form W2G, okay? And it's one of those things where you need to understand that Form 945 is available on the IRS website. It's actually interactive, so you can complete it online and print it out, not a problem at all. And this is kind of cool. I mean, a lot of our business clients, that's what they do. And especially when they have a very simple tax situation, then they can actually file Form 945, not a problem. But if you have made a lot of payments during the year and you have a pretty much complicated tax situation, especially when it comes to you paying independent contractors. You might want to hire a CPA and I think I've said this before, but it's important because when you actually think about how much you're paying this professional, if you're paying that professional versus how much the IRS could potentially fine you if things go wrong, then you know this is a good investment to actually enlist the help of a third party to kind of help you out. Boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about Form 945. Now, remember that when we talk about Form 945, the filing is pretty straightforward, okay? And it's one of those things where you have to have a clear idea about your monthly or quarterly tax liability, because you can actually file the form using the IRS e-file system, and you can make backup withholding payments to the IRS electronically using the EFTPS, okay? And it's one of those things where you must break down the total to show monthly tax liability if you pay more than $2,500 in backup withholding during the year. The IRS just wants to make sure that you're sending the payments as you're getting them and not waiting until the end. Okay, and it's one of those things where information you must report on Form 945 includes all federal income tax withheld from all individuals subject to backup withholding itself, total deposits made during the year, and balance due or overpayment. So if the delta goes in your favor, then you got a refund. If not, you actually have to pay extra. And it's one of those things where when you would be required to file Form 945 if, let's say, for example, you had a freelance web designer working for you last year that you paid as an independent contractor. Now, the contractor did not give you a TIN, or the TIN they gave you was incorrect. Now, the IRS has sent you a notice that backup withholding payments must be made. And it's one of those things where you have to really understand that you generally don't have to start taking backup withholding from payments from independent contractors unless you're all notified to do so by the IRS, okay? And generally speaking, you will want to notify your employee. You will collect backup withholding, report the withholding to the IRS, and then deposit the withholding to the IRS on a monthly or semi-weekly schedule. At the end of the year, you will submit Form 945. So typically, you can stop backup withholding if the contractor gives you their correct TIN or the IRS tells you that you can stop. So it's one of those things where, again, you just want to make sure you are in compliance with the law. And Form 945, actually, you file it with the IRS at the same time you would file W-2 forms and 1099 forms. And so filing Form 1099 NEC or 1099 MIS, those do not let's say relieve you of the responsibility to file Form 945 in addition to the other form. It's very important to understand that Form 945 doesn't go to the payee. Backup withholding payments are made the same way as withholding from employees using the rules for determining whether to make deposits semi-weekly or monthly. So it's one of those things where you have to see what really works for you. And when it comes to where you have to file, if you are filing manually, if you're filing like a regular through snail mail, you have the address depends on where you are located. So the IRS has pretty clear instructions as to where you're located and how this will apply to your specific situation. So if you have any question, please let us know in the comment section, and we'll certainly get back to you. We'll study your city and state and tell you exactly which situation is applicable to your situation. And so one thing I also want to say here is that you have to understand that the IRS is constantly changing their mailing addresses. So please make sure that you can either reach out to the IRS directly, or let's just say you go to the website, to the agency's website to have a clear idea. One thing I also want to say about Form 945 is that it's one of those things where we are just we have seen that in our experience. It's just a lot easy to cut to the chase. Just file electronically. If you file electronically, you're in good hands. like you are basically avoiding any potential issues because like tardiness, let's say tardiness. Let's say your form was filed late, but if you file electronically, you are sure that the IRS will get the data real fast. Now, if you file manually, you're gonna have to actually have a date stamped like the date you were filing the form. And sorry, let me just drink some water here. So the thing I was saying is that if you're filing the form, depending upon whether you're filing electronically or manually, you have to really follow certain steps just to make sure that you are not actually penalized for tardiness. In other words, you're not penalized because you are filing the form late, and or you're not filing at all, especially after you have withheld, you have backup withheld some money from your contractors. It's important to understand that when we talk about Form 945, you have to understand that you have a certain category of filers. Okay, now the following persons may sign the return for each type of business entity. So sole proprietorship, it has to be the individual who owns the business. For a corporation, including an LLC or let's say an S corporation that is treated as a corporation, the president, the VP, or other principal officer. Partnership, a responsible and duly authorized partner, member, or officer having knowledge of its affairs. If you have a single member LLC, then it has to be you. So if you are, let's say, if the single member LLC is treated as a disregarded entity for federal tax purposes, then it has to be the owner of the LLC or a principal officer duly authorized to sign. It's important to actually sign the form, otherwise the IRS will reject it. Okay, and so the Form 945 is due on January 31st, unless, let's say, if that day actually file, if the day falls on a federal holiday, then or weekend for that matter, then it has to be the next day. However, if your tax liability payments were made on time and in full, you may file by February 10th. So you actually have like the IRS gives you 10 more days if you are, let's say, like if all your tax liabilities have been settled before. If you file by mail, please make sure your filing is properly addressed, contains sufficient postage, and is postmarked by the USPS by the due date to be considered timely filed. If not, the return will be considered filed when it's actually received. So you do not want to have that. So there are some penalties from late filing. And so it's one of those things where you have to understand, failing to file Form 945 or even failing and or depositing tax payments due late, unless there is a reasonable cause, you are actually going to have penalties and interest. So the interest charged on late tax payment is calculated with a rate set by state law. And so if you fail to withhold and pay taxes to the U.S. Treasury that are required, a trust fund recovery penalty may apply. The penalty is 100% of the unpaid trust fund tax. If the unpaid tax cannot be collected from the business immediately, the penalty could be imposed on all persons. Yeah, very important. All persons that the IRS determines is responsible for collecting and paying this amount and willfully did not do so. So it's one of those things where the agency is trying to really figure out the let's say the breadth and depth of non-compliance and actually applying penalties accordingly. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. In today's conversation, I was just talking to you about Form 945. And so let me do a quick recap here. So I gave you the overview, the approach, and I spoke a little bit about the steps. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.